obelisk. The obelisk is the key.
Good evening and welcome to the Obelisk. Apologize for the lateness. I'll explain in a second. Tonight's guest is Joshua Cutchin, author, cryptid researcher, tubist, sousaphonist, I forget which one. Member of an awesome band and just an all-around great guy. Josh, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you back.
Well, I appreciate that kind intro, and it's good to be here. It's been a minute.
It has, like 3 years since we talked, I think.
Yeah.
Nish can't make it tonight. She has a personal thing going on, which is not my story to tell, as you said. So anyway, yeah. So Josh has been, I think, like in 2019 was the last time we talked. You and I were going to go ghost hunting, and then it was March 2020.
Yeah, and then I think like after a while, we're like, there was that initial sort of pandemic, sort of let's hold and see what everything's going on. I think we kept towards the end of it, we kind of we had set up another date to go get together and go ghost hunting, and then I think either you had a personal thing or I had a personal thing or something like that happened, and then we just sort of drifted away.
Well, I got sick. I caught pneumonia.
Oh, okay.
I caught whatever. I personally think it was whatever they're calling COVID was. That I had that pneumonia thing. My kidneys failed. I had congestive heart failure. I mean, I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. It was fucked up.
Wow. So this, if anybody's listening, if this gives you an idea of how little Jerry and I have caught up, that's at least partial news to me. I think maybe you might have mentioned that at some point.
No, you knew I was in the hospital. I probably didn't tell you the whole story, and I won't get into it now. But I had a crazy experience in the hospital. Like crazy shit happened to me. Like I thought people were trying to kill me, kind of thing.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. No, James says that's when I entered the Matrix. So. And our joke amongst the Cruising with Steak guys, you've never been on that show, have you?
I think maybe a long time ago.
Well, that when it was
like 2017 or 18, if I was, I can't remember though.
Yeah, when it was actually a legit show with interviews. Now it's a shit show circus. It's hilarious. It's awesome. I love doing it, but we don't have like guests anymore. It's just us BSing on Zoom. So, since we've last talked, you've written Where the Footprints End, came out, right?
Yeah.
1 and 2.
Yep.
With Tim, right?
Yep. Got sober.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Wrote Ecology of Souls 1 and 2, and now wrote a novel. So I guess I've been busy in the interim.
You have?
Yeah. It's a lot of work in 3-4 years.
And I'm still working on my novel. I can't even get past the 3rd chapter here. So
it's a different bird.
It is.
It's a different thing.
It is.
Yeah, with its own unique set of challenges, but we can get into that later if you want to.
No, we could take this conversation wherever you want. I'm ecstatic to talk to you because I missed you. I really did.
I know. I know. It's been sort of interesting trying to, that sort of 2020 year was a time when a lot of like traditions and get-togethers and friendships and it's a lot of things just sort of like that was the excuse to let them go, and I thought that we were briefly mentioning Paramania before we started, and for a while I thought Paramania was going to be a casualty of the pandemic, but we sort of mustered our forces and got together in West Virginia last year, and then this year we got together in New England. So we kind of through sheer will brought that back into existence. But yeah, just a lot of things changed. My wife left her desk in March of 2020 and hasn't been back to the office except maybe like 10 times or so. She's working remote. So good things and bad things, I suppose.
I've been to my headquarters once. Yeah. Since this all started. Yeah,
I mean, especially nowadays, as long as the infrastructure stays in place, which who knows how much longer that's going to happen, but as long as the infrastructure is in place, working from home, I think you wind up with happier workers and you know, I know that, you know, my wife's productivity has shut up quite a bit because she's not, you know, having to deal with Bob across the hall who wants to stop by and talk about, you know, video of a skunk that he saw or something, you know, just stuff like that. Yeah.
I want to see that video. So cool. So where the footprints end, talk a little bit about that if you can. How does that work different from, or a transition from, your prior work in like the fairy lore, and like Trojan Feast, I think was the last one in that series, right? Or no, I'm sorry.
No, it was Trojan Feast 2015, Brimstone Deceit 2016, Thieves in the Night 2018.
Thieves in the Night, that was it. Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to take a break, which I've said after every one of my books, and I keep getting roped into new projects. And I remember it was after Thieves in the Night that I said, I'm going to take a break here. And I think, if memory serves, I was actually at the beach. Then I got a message from Tim Renner that said that he wanted to do the definitive guide to strange Bigfoot. And I was like, okay, I'm in. Damn it, I'm in. And we sort of ended up kicking that back and forth quite a bit. And I think, honestly, we had written most of it before I even met Tim for the first time in 2019. There was just a little bit of icing to be put on the cake, but yeah, so I had the good fortune of meeting Tim, and now I have my wife has some family members who have moved up to like within 45 minutes of Tim, so I'm gonna get to see a lot more of Tim. Oh yeah, a lot more of Tim going forward.
I think you and I met Tim at the same time, right? At Strange Realities.
Yes. No, I had actually met Tim earlier that year at a conference in Rhode Island.
Okay.
Yeah.
I met him in Nashville that year.
Yeah. And that was actually the last time that I saw Tim. Yes, that was the last time I saw Tim. So I'm going to be seeing him again later this year, which I'm ecstatic about. But in terms of the progression to where the footprints end, it sort of ended up being a place for me to talk about a lot of the stuff involving Bigfoot that, you know, I certainly felt like didn't really have a good place to live anywhere else. So one of those things in that capacity was talking about and addressing the similarities between Bigfoot and the fairy folklore, which sounds super incongruous at first. You know, people are like, little people. Well, in the pop culture idea, you know, these little ladies with wings floating around, and Bigfoot, like, those couldn't be farther from each other, but that they really have a lot of shared DNA, if I dare say it, involved. You know, to the extent that there are plenty of modern, you know, fairy encounters that describe fairies as being little short hairy beings, which, you know, all the cryptozoologists want to call Littlefoot, and it's like, well, you know, maybe it's a juvenile Bigfoot, or it's a subspecies of Bigfoot, or, you know, it's harkening back to this older tradition that a lot of people had of these little people, you know, being sort of small and having some of these simian features. And in fact, a lot of the lore involving household spirits, like brownies in Scotland, or goblins in France, or the Peckhamderlin in Germany, you'll find references to them being like, you know, small little ape-like creatures. So from there, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to like, okay, well, if fairies are shapeshifters and size shifters, then it seems, you know, not entirely out of the realm of possibility that these things are at least somehow related. And then you get more granular, and it's like, oh, this is there's totally something shared here. My favorite example of that is the braided horse manes. You know, a lot of cryptozoologists will say that, well, not a lot, but there is a subset of cryptozoologists who will say that Bigfoot steal into stables and braid horses' manes after dark. And obviously a lot of that is people not brushing their horses' manes out. Like, I'm acknowledging that. Yeah. But at the same time, it's interesting to see that same sort of phenomena was blamed on, you know, witches and fairies in Western Europe. So it's like, well, you know, it's kind of like we just sort of substitute our boogeyman depending on what our culture finds, you know, palatable. So yeah, I guess that's probably the shared connective tissue, that, and, you know, a big part of those books was addressing these anomalous lights in conjunction with Bigfoot, which are straight out of so much fairy folklore.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with I can't remember her name, but she has a website, I think it's Saucers Over Cashiers?
Yeah,
or something like that.
I'm trying. Is it like Janice Carter Kay or something like that?
You're gonna make me look
I can't remember her name. But she also wrote she also wrote this great book. So that website is, I say this in the most loving way
Skyships
possible.
Over Cashiers.
Skyships Over Cashiers. I say this in the most loving way possible. That website is bonkers, and I love it for that.
Yeah.
Because you know me, I'm a fan of the bonkers stuff. She also wrote an interesting book that I haven't yet really sat down and read. I've skimmed through it, and I have a copy, but it's called Cherokee Little People Were Real. That basically puts forth the the story at the heart of the book is that was basically a conspiracy to demolish fairy dwellings underneath Western Carolina University, which is a campus that I spent a lot of time at in honor bands in high school and band competitions and stuff. And it's just such a lovely bonkers idea. But there's some gems in terms of her speaking with indigenous informants and stuff in that book that are good as well. So but yeah, she's definitely someone whose body of work seems to suggest that there is something connecting all these different things for certain.
Absolutely. Well, cool. That's cool. So, I don't know if you answered my question or if I made it state it right. So, you did. You did answer it. Yeah. You said you were burned out. Not in all those. Not in the same amount of words, but
I mean that's what I'm realizing is that I'm always burned out.
Yeah. But after we went to that was it Expedition Bigfoot? Was that where we had the talks?
Yeah, the Bigfoot Museum. Yep,
after talking
Cherry Log. Yeah.
Yes. After talking to that BFRO guy, the guy was running that place.
I'm not sure if he was affiliated with BF. He was ex BFRO.
Ex BFRO, okay, yeah. And he told me this story about the floating Bigfoot and the poltergeist stuff. It's like that's when we're like I wonder if I know you heard that story, and I'm really curious if that planted the seed for where the footprints end.
No, footprints was all Tim's idea.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, and originally he wanted to sort of do a glossary or an encyclopedia style thing, and it got kind of Josh Cutchinized, I guess, with end notes and narratives and. But at the same time, hearing that from Dave Picara, and I've had the chance to meet and speak with Dave on a couple other occasions since then. Hearing that from him just goes to show you how sort of sanitized the world of cryptozoology wants to make these things. And just just the other day, I met someone who was trying to think of the most delicate way to put this so as to not out them, but someone who was working in a capacity that demanded that they sort of ascribe to the flesh and blood hypothesis of Bigfoot. And he said, it's kind of our official policy that Bigfoot is a relict hominid, but I'm really into the paranormal Bigfoot stuff. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like
why can't it be both?
Yeah, I mean, why can't that's I have a way to have my cake and eat it too. I compare it to the Mike Cleland owl stuff. Mike says that you talk to Mike, and Mike doesn't think that every owl is a UFO owl, right? Like there are real owls out there, but something about the owl seems very attractive to whatever's behind the UFO phenomenon. And I would argue that there's a way to sort of reconcile, the idea of a relict hominid within that sort of framework too. Just as the UFO phenomenon seems to appropriate the image of the deer or the owl or some of these other animals, it also loves appropriating the idea of the image of this small band of relict hominids somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And that's my have your cake and eat it too. So there's strange Bigfoot, and there's also quote unquote mundane Bigfoot, as mundane as Bigfoot could be.
Ape, the swamp ape or a skunk ape.
Skunk ape, yeah. You're in skunk ape territory.
I am a skunk ape. In on Cruising with Steak, we have a hate mail segment. It's a joke. I mean, we let anyone can write anything, and we will read it on the air. And for like the last 4 years, I've been writing these faux hate mails from this guy from Norway who's palling around with an alien in a flying saucer, and they just go to different places and do different shit. And part of that lore is that they captured Stinky Bigfoot, i.e. the skunk ape, in Florida, and he married this guy's sister, and they had a baby.
This horrifically deformed, half human, half Bigfoot baby.
It's a very hairy baby. Tiny baby Sven. Yeah.
Sven.
That's the dude's name.
Oh man.
On my YouTube channel, I have a compilation of like the first 2 years of his emails.
It's amazing.
If you got an hour to waste, it's worth a listen.
You know, I used to listen to so many paranormal podcasts, and it's just, I would say the past, probably post-pandemic, now that I think about it, it's just absolutely exploded in terms of the number of podcasts that there are to listen to. I'm just kind of
tuned out.
There's literally not enough hours in the day, and I try to listen to stuff voraciously. Like I'm listening while I'm obviously in the car, but like while I'm doing menial tasks or while I'm doing research as best I can, and there's literally not enough time.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I actually listened to any kind of non or alternate media podcast. I've been so focused on like medical stuff for the last 3 years,
right?
Like
right.
In terms of the pandemic, that I've ignored everything else that's been happening. So
yeah,
I'm happy that that's waning now, and I can get back into some other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I was with some friends, and we were at a house, and we don't have cable here.
Good for you.
And it was so wild watching like NBC or ABC News, one of these big news outlets, and like seeing how every story gets like 3 minutes, and then they're on to the next thing. I'm like, that's not nearly enough time to unpack everything in this story. You know. Yeah, it was kind of an uncanny feeling, that and seeing ads, like,
I know, it's crazy how many there are.
Yeah, I think the ad that's been spamming me on YouTube is like, what is it, Timo or Timu or something? This ad for like this off-brand yeah. So like there's like a handful of things that you hear over and over again on YouTube, but like to just sit there and be inundated with ads for like 4 minutes is also kind of a surreal thing too. And so there's this, I went to journalism school, and there's this idea that everyone thinks that advertising doesn't affect them. This has been sort of quote unquote proven in social sciences. Everyone thinks that advertising doesn't affect them, but advertising affects everyone equally once you like map it all out, which is kind of a creepy, uncanny thing to think, that even if you don't think it's affecting you, it's affecting you.
Right.
But I do think that like after having not seen, like after you sort of cut the cord on cable and you step back to it, you're like, I feel like I just stepped out of and then back into this surreal other reality. And it's like, this is all the jokes in the ads land flat and stuff like that. I know people didn't come here to talk about modern media marketing, but
no, I mean, everything's interesting. Cool. So, The Ecology of Souls, I'm not familiar with that book, or volumes actually. What's going on with that? What's that about? How did that come about?
Well, I've been thinking about this book for probably 5 or so years by the point that it came out, and there are a couple of things that always bugged me, things that got stuck in the back of my mind, and I kept returning back to and saying, how do I reconcile this? And one of them was that famous quote from Anne Strieber. She's getting a lot of correspondence from people after Communion comes out, and she writes on a piece of paper, "This has something to do with what we call death." And that's a statement that Whitley's returned to subsequently throughout every one of his nonfiction books.
Yeah, for like the last 3 or 4 years, he's been on that.
Yeah, he has.
Yeah.
It's popped up like in order to even address the subject matter in Ecology of Souls, I had to like do just a chapter just devoted to Whitley's output on the subject, because like that specific motif of death and the visitors is just so deep in his work. So that always stuck with me. The fact that one of the things to come out of those letters that were received from communion, one of the things that led Anne to say that was the fact that people were seeing dead loved ones in alien abductions, which, does not jive at all with the extraterrestrial hypothesis, in my opinion. And it's something that, I wouldn't say it happens in most of these cases, but it happens enough that it could be considered a pretty strong subset. So that was something that I always wanted to sort of reconcile. The other thing is two books that I consider sort of foundational to my work sort of left something on the table, I feel like, regarding this topic specifically, and I'll elaborate on that. One of those is George P. Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal, which talks about obviously this trickster archetype, and he talks quite a bit about some figures like Hermes, and there's and how like the sort of trickster aspects manifest throughout different subsets of the paranormal, but it's never really addressed that Hermes is a psychopomp. He's one of these figures that leads you across the threshold of death. And so I felt like there was a good opportunity to sort of take a look at UFOs through that psychopomp lens. And the other thing is Passport to Magonia, Jacques Vallée's 1969 book. He does a great job of showing this connection between UFO lore and the fairy folklore. But prior to the rise of Theosophy, if you talked to a lot of these populations that believed in fairies, they would have a close association with the fairies and the dead as well. So if you sort of think about that sort of transitive property, if the dead are the fairies and the fairies are the UFO occupants, without really saying any of those interpretations is correct, stepping back from that, what does that say about UFO occupants? Well, it implies that there's some connection to death there as well. So
I have a unifying theory for you too that we could talk about when you're done.
Okay. Well, this is sort of what that ended up being for me, because I just wanted to look at the UFO angle, but it became very apparent that you had to talk about things like near-death experiences and monuments and altered states of consciousness, and it sort of ended up being, the subtitle for Ecology of Souls is a new mythology of death and the paranormal, and I realized how pretentious that sounds, a new mythology, but it ended up being so comprehensive in terms of the way that it addressed a lot of these different topics. I mean, there's even a chapter, the longest chapter in the book, if you can believe it, because I have several chapters devoted to UFOs, so whatever. But like the longest chapter in the book is the cryptid chapter, because there are plenty of connections that you can draw between cryptids and death as well. And so it ended up being this really comprehensive thing. And it's a snapshot of the way that I felt last year, the past 3 years, about how these things might be interrelated. But what it's really done for me is it's proven to kind of be a flexible framework too, where I can incorporate new data and it still kind of makes sense. And it's also allowed me to sort of reconcile a lot of things about the paranormal that I didn't really know what to do with. Like a classic example that I like to go to is these stories of UFOs that transform into or out of birds. It's like, what do you do with that? If you believe that the witness isn't crazy, isn't hallucinating and isn't lying to you, if you actually take the witness at their face value, what do you do with that? And then that whole idea of the UFO becoming a bird makes a lot more sense when you sort of look at, okay, well, Carl Jung talked about the circle as a symbol of totality and the soul, and there's this long-standing tradition of orbs of light being the human soul, and the bird is also a symbol of the human soul. So it really sort of, the whole Ecology of Souls model allowed me to sort of make some peace with that. And it's like I've said to people, I don't know if this is objectively what's going on with the paranormal, but it has granted me some degree of peace with a lot of these things that I find confusing, and it works for me. And honestly, Jerry, like there was a period of time right after I released it where I was like, I could walk away from all this and not have to write another book ever again.
Black-pilled.
Well, not really black-pilled, but but just like I felt like I'd said my piece. Like I don't know how you would follow that up. Now, obviously, what I ended up doing was writing a novel because that's the only thing that I can think about doing as a follow up. And I'm working on 3 other projects now that are all back to my nonfiction roots. But it really was one of those moments where it's like this is kind of all that I have to say on the paranormal in this 2-volume set, and 3-volume set if you want to get the end notes. Yeah.
And honestly, from my perspective, that's admirable. Because if you look at people like, not that I'm dissing his work, but Nick Redfern, he writes decent books, but he just got to put one out every year. You know, he cranks them out and he'll just recover or cover again the same old story. I mean, how many books do we need about Roswell?
Yeah, and I admire Nick's model seems to be very savvy in the sense that a lot of the things that he ends up writing about has sort of been, he sort of does the research for them through blog posts or through articles for other websites, and then they get sort of reincorporated into this framework. And honestly, if you look at what he writes with that in mind, you can kind of predict his next book. But yeah, I have noticed that I tend to write really long books. Ecology of Souls altogether is about 260,000 words. But at the same time, like I just feel like I say this with all the love in my heart for the paranormal community. There aren't a lot of folks who are committed to giving these topics the amount of depth and frankly breadth, but also the amount of depth and the amount of nuance that I think that they deserve. There's a lot of 60,000 word books about a flap of sightings in some area or about something that's like, well, no, you can go further with this. You can go further, like take the interdisciplinary approach, look through scholarly journals and bring in some sort of topic that you wouldn't even normally think of to talk about this other phenomena through a different lens. And I think that I wish that there was more of that, but there isn't too much.
I do too. So my hypothesis about the connection between all those things is that if you take a step back and look at how we process, how humans see through their eyeballs, we receive energy, frequencies, and whatnot through our eyes, and our brain formats that into an image, right? So over the course of time, our consciousness, the collective consciousness, changes in what to expect in our reality. So 200 years ago, whatever energy represents a fairy was thought of as a fairy. And this goes back to your first set of books. Today, these days, since, whenever, 1930s, 40s, aliens are more the thing to, it's in our consciousness as a construct. Whatever energy presented to us as fairies now presents as quote unquote aliens or grays.
I'm super sympathetic to that. I mean, I think that people get me backwards, or they misinterpret what I say a lot of times, where they think that I'm saying that, oh no, these modern aliens, we're actually mistaking them. They're actually fae folk, and that's not what I'm saying. Nor am I saying that people, in yesteryear were misinterpreting extraterrestrials for fairies. I'm saying that, like, much in the sentiment that you just expressed, the thing at its heart is the objective reality of the thing is the same throughout.
Exactly.
It's just it's our interpretation or our framework or some mechanism like you described that's the thing that's changing. And something I find really interesting that might be worth exploring was, well, if our interpretation of this energy has continued to evolve, we should be seeing when will we see the next iteration of it?
Exactly.
So you can say, okay, well, maybe we thought of them all as spirits in that sort of very animistic sort of sense, and then we thought of them as fairies, and then we thought of them as UFO nauts. What's the next thing? And I think there's a cogent case to be made. I believe it was Martin Kottenmeier who put this out there, but I mean, it sounds like something brilliant that he would say. He's one of the great unsung UFO historians that's still with us. But I think there's an argument to be made that the next iteration will be something AI based. Meaning again that the energy remains the same, but like what we apply to it is like, the abduction narrative will shift from extraterrestrials coming down in a spaceship and entering our room and having big heads and big eyes. It will shift to like, oh, the AI robots, the AI robots, well, Valis maybe, but like, the AI robots came from their underground base and they took me,
Yep.
I think that might be something that we see, and might even be able to see in our lifetime. The phenomenon itself, it seems to have remained relatively stable in terms of its presentation for the past 30 or 40 years, I would argue, with minor variations and minor updates here. Now we're talking about Tic Tacs instead of, Art Nouveau flying saucers. But I think that in our lifetimes, we may very well see, the trope of the grays coming into your bedroom and taking you, changing into something barely recognizable. If that sort of a shift is going to happen, it's going to happen in the 2020s. I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. In some way, that's already happened. Or I'm sorry, that transition, I believe, is already happening, because a lot of UFO researchers will tell you the grays are actually androids or robots or meat suits that that are controlled by the reptilians. I mean, that's one of the big tropes out there, that they're not organic beings or lab-grown consciousness suits, or whatever, avatars.
Yeah. And, there's so much AI. I mean, I say this in a sympathetic way because I think it does pose some problems, but there's so much AI hysteria out there that I can see people, going down that route too. The other thing that I think might supplant it might be this sort of time traveler idea, which has been around for a long time, but is recently seeing sort of a resurgence as well. And that would certainly fit in with the eschatology of the 2020s.
Absolutely. It's interesting you brought that up, because I've been in my transition out of medical OCD podcast listening, I've started to get back into the whole Project Phoenix, Rainbow, Montauk project, exploring that some more. And a big part of that is the time travel aspect.
Right.
I don't know if you know much about that, and I won't get into it because it's deep. But
I try to, one of the projects I thought about writing before Ecology was sort of a definitive guide to missing time, and even the topic of, I have a friend who works at JPL, and I was talking to him about it, and even just the concept of time dilation breaks my brain. And so that's the biggest piece of the puzzle that I don't even touch on in Ecology of Souls, really, is the time component. And the time component does play some sort of a role in these sort of extended consciousness encounters, whatever you want to call them. And again, like I'm of the mindset where I have trouble distinguishing an alien abduction from a shamanic initiation, from a near-death experience, from a DMT trip, from a visit with the Faeries. Like, they all seem to be the same modality with just different, garnish on top. But there's something about time in these different modalities that plays a role, and I'm ill-equipped to address it. I just don't have the mental bandwidth to do that.
Yeah. There are a couple of alleged time travelers that are public, or that worked in government time travel programs, that kind of thing. Preston Nichols and Bielik from Montauk, they're one.
Right.
Andrew Basiago from Project, what was that project called? Project Pegasus, where he allegedly saw Lincoln speak, But then you have the lore people like John Teeter, the guy who came back in the pickup truck. Remember that?
Yep.
Do you know Eric? Eric Wargo, right?
Yeah.
He might be a good collaborator for a time book.
Oh, I'm not fit to tie Eric's shoes, I don't think, but I appreciate it. I kind of have the same feeling like I did. I was approached a number of years ago about collaborating with Chris Albeck on something, and I'm like, you don't want to work with me. Like, I'm a hack. But yeah, my thing about a lot of our current, my biggest problem with a lot of the current time travel dialogue, not the Michael Masters stuff, because that seems to be well put together, but a lot of the other stuff gets real secret, super soldier adjacent real quick, and I just have a hard time buying into those narratives. You know, they sound a little bit, they're a little bit too Star Wars for me, and that's when I check out. You know, whenever, you know, I believe experiencers, probably to a fault, but when you start getting into these elaborate, what I call it, the Star Wars syndrome, where you're like, you know, the Chobani Empire was collaborating with the, you know, Zebel-Ganubians, and then they had a war, but there was, you know, genetic tampering, and they had to kill them with dehydration guns. I'm like, this is just sounding a little too Hubbard for me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely agree with that. Those people, I don't know what delusion they're under, or what actual program they're in.
Well, you know, is it an op? Is it?
I don't know.
Is it, you know, what? I don't know what to do with it either. So I kind of, I don't touch it because I'm afraid of it, or because I'm necessarily prejudiced with. I just don't know what to make of it. You know,
and,
I mean,
and there's no way for us to get answers. It's either it's all hearsay up until a point, and then it's like, you're right,
completely completely unfalsifiable.
Yes. So I mean, there's nothing you could do there. And I mean, I was way into that when 10 years ago or whatever, 15 years ago.
I'll listen to it and I'll eat it up in that sort of, like, you know, cinema popcorn sort of way. Like, this is just a fun story. But in terms of, like, actually, it's I mean, honestly, there are a couple of topics like this that are sort of, I wouldn't say that they're no-fly zones for me, but they are just areas of the conversation where there's so much noise and so much dialogue that I just don't have any retention for it. I mean, honestly, Roswell's the same way. Like, if you want to have a podcast on Roswell, I'm probably the least qualified guest that you could get on it, because there's just been so many stories and there's been so much conflicting stuff, and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other for me. And, you know, I just don't think that I have anything to add to that conversation, you know, beyond, you know, referring to Redfern again. I really am. I do think that there's something to his body snatchers in the desert hypothesis.
Oh, absolutely. I adore his work. I was just making the point that he will churn out novel or book after book.
Oh yeah, no, I took what you were saying in the right way. But, you know, but, like, that's, for me to get really engaged with the Roswell stuff, it has to be a real overturning of the apple cart. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be something that just kind of comes out of nowhere and is like, you know, upends everything that we know.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I liked his take on it being Japanese experimental plane or whatever it was. There's a good trope going around YouTube right now on UFO Twitter. Sorry, not on Twitter, on UFO Twitter. There's a good trope going around on Twitter, in the UFO Twitter community, about how did aliens travel light years across the galaxy to visit us in 1947, only to get disabled by radar. You know?
Yeah.
I thought that was funny. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the skeptical, and that's, you know, a lot of the reason that I'm in this pickle, right? And this is kind of where the footprints end pickle. It's where you end up sympathizing so much with the skeptical arguments, but you also talk to people who you have, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this feeling that they saw something genuinely strange. And what do you do with that? And you know, and it's like, that's one of why I say it's where the footprints end pickle, is because, you know, the skeptics will say things like, well, you know, we don't have a body and we don't have good footage. And so how do you square that with this being, you know, predominantly, you know, I know we left some wiggle room earlier, but how do you square that with this being an animal? And even the cryptozoologists, like, I know their comebacks to the complaints, and it's always like, you know, well, we don't have many people, don't often stumble upon the bodies of bears or the bodies of cougars. And I'm like, yeah, but people have in the course of human history, and it has, you know. And I know that there are these allegations that Bigfoot buried their dead, or the government swoops in to confiscate the bodies, but at the same time, like, I remain sympathetic to that skeptical argument. And at the same time, I've experienced some odd Bigfoot adjacent stuff, and I know people, I've spoken with people who are completely beyond a shadow of a doubt convinced that they've seen something like Bigfoot. And so yeah, to that end, I really resonate with a lot of those skeptical arguments about, you know, if they're so sophisticated, why are they always crashing? They really do. And it's like very much like every country has its own wild man.
Yes.
It has its own Bigfoot. Every country kind of has its UFO crash or multiple UFO crashes, you know, depending on the size of the country. So that's what leaves me saying, okay, well, maybe there's something else going on here. And maybe something else is, you know, maybe it makes more sense to compare, you know, a quote unquote UFO crash to a Mount Sinai moment, or to a Sermon on the Mount moment, or to, you know, Muhammad's tour of the heavens moment than it does to little green scientists from another planet being hapless and crashing all the time.
Did you see that video that's circulating with the Bigfoot they saw the train window?
The train, yeah, I just saw that one, yeah.
I mean, it's, again, too far away to make any detail out, and it's like, I don't know what to make of this.
Yeah, and they zoomed in, and it kind of looks like the Jack Link's beef jerky Sasquatch face. You know, and that's the thing that, you know, you're lucky that you caught me on a bit of paranormal footage that I actually had seen, because most of it, like,
it's the only one I've
give two shits. You know, it's
the last thing I saw was those stupid aliens in, where was it, Texas or whatever, or God, I don't remember.
The Mexican mummies? Yes. The Mexican mummy.
No, that was nonsense. The 8-foot tall aliens that landed in the backyard. I think it was
in Vegas.
Was it Vegas? I don't remember.
Yeah. Was there footage of that?
Allegedly.
I mean, so a lot of people were sort of poo-pooing that whole incident. And maybe it's come out as an ironclad hoax or whatever, but the fact that there is that body camera footage of an asteroid landing, and for a moment everything felt very like, you know, 1970s humanoid report. it kind of warmed my heart a little bit, so I want it to be true. But you know, even that had some paranormal aspects that didn't really make it to the tellings of the story. I mean, the kid who was involved in the sighting said that his family came inside and they heard a sound like rain or footsteps on the roof, something to that extent. You know, Tim and I wrote extensively about Bigfoot and things jumping on your roof, but also, you know, Whitley talks about the visitors kind of sounding like a rain shower coming in on his roof sometimes. But then the family prayed away the aliens. And it's like,
good for them.
Okay, well that doesn't make it to national news, does it? Because that's just not part of the extraterrestrial narrative.
But was it effective, or were they just done tormenting those people?
Or,
you know,
or were the aliens like, oh no, they're gonna start preaching at us, we got to get out of here?
Exactly. You know? I bet they have purple hair.
But you know, it is something that, like, that just didn't really make, that aspect didn't make it out there, and of course it didn't. But you know, but it is interesting. It is interesting to sort of monitor the disclosure discussion and to see how it always sort of retreats to spiritual warfare. You know.
Yeah, well, there's that whole faction of people who are in that camp, but yeah, this whole disclosure thing. Again, I don't think there's anything to disclose. I don't think they know anything. And if they do, they're not going to tell us. And for the most part, all the nuts and bolts stuff that they've got videos of and whatnot are probably military-industrial complex black projects, or if Admiral Byrd was to be believed, it's whatever civilization is down in Antarctica.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken about this in a couple other places, but you know, I find myself trying to be more charitable to the whole disclosure movement nowadays. I don't think that Grush was lying in the testimony. I'm not sure that he isn't being used by someone to put a narrative out there. I do think that the hearings had an audience that stretched far beyond the citizenry of the United States of America. I do think that I know some people will think that I'm sounding like a cynic in this regard, but I don't think it makes much sense to expect anything to come out of this particular disclosure season. And one of the reasons for that is, everybody was very excited about some of this language that was inserted into the NDAA about, the U.S. government having to disclose its non-human intelligence and non-human craft, and they're like, "Oh, it's modeled after the language that they used to disclose the Kennedy documents." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let's look at the Kennedy documents then." 99% has been released, but the question number one is, what's in that 1% that wasn't released? And number two, that 99% has been so redacted that it's hard to make heads or tails of a lot of it. But I will say this: there is a general consensus among the public that something is strange with the Kennedy assassination, and I think that sense, I think, is more prevalent and widespread than it was even like 10 years ago. There are more people who are like, yeah, there's something strange going on with that, and I think that's probably, if again, predictions like this age like milk, right? But. Right. But I think that, like, if something comes out of this disclosure season, it will be something akin to that, where it's like, okay, well, we all have a sense now that something strange is going on, but as far as like getting something specific as to exactly what it is, I don't think it's forthcoming.
No, and I think it's, whether it's real or not, whatever it is, and the disclosure movement is just going to lead to space weaponry. I think that's the ultimate goal there, is just so they can get money to build shit to put in space.
I mean, it's the every one of the Aliens films, always ends up not as a genre, but I mean specifically the Alien franchise started with Ridley Scott's films. Like it's always about weaponization, Yeah. That's the lesson of those movies, is that it's always about finding a way to weaponize stuff,
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, that's where that's the corner that we've painted ourselves into,
It's interesting stuff. I remember back in 2017 when oh God, who was it? Oh, that guy I don't like. Mike Hughes? Michael Hughes? Is that his name?
If that's who you're talking about. No.
The witch guy?
Mike, yeah. Mike Hughes is, yeah.
Yeah, he was on Soraya's show talking about that first New York Times article about that. I remember listening to that and thinking, wow, these people really are buying it.
At the same time, I want to defend that sort of standpoint, because the conversation has changed between 2017 and now in terms of the normies that I can approach about the UFO topic. Like, there was something that ended up being a thawing effect from that. Which I was initially very critical of, like, oh, this article isn't telling us anything new, but at the same time, I have noticed in my own personal interactions with people, even even people who are very much predisposed to not even entertain this idea prior to that, it was this sort of, there has been an opening up to actually talk about and engage with the UFO idea seriously. Now, I will say, that there is I see a big problem with that sort of thinking, that, oh, we've been given permission by a respectable authority source to talk about this, so now we can talk about it. I mean, it's kind of like what happened with Michael Pollan and the whole psychedelic renaissance, that happened a couple of years ago. It's like, oh, well, now this is a respectable topic, we can talk about it now, and they're not really paying attention to the thousands of years of indigenous testimony or all those psychonauts that came before us. It's like, oh, well, we've gotten permission from the establishment to talk about these things. That's something that I do think that the Times article did, for better or worse. I think, so
it legitimized it in the eyes of the public.
Right. So for those of us who've been following the topic, it's like, well, this doesn't really do anything. But for everyone else, it's like, oh, we have permission to talk about this. So.
Thank you, Gary, for the super chat. I forgot what I was going to say now. Damn it. Oh, you were talking about more people are believing in Kennedy shenanigans, and I wanted to add the moon landing to that as well. A lot of people are questioning how that could have happened.
I feel like I've heard a lot more of that too lately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you seriously look at it and investigate it, it's nonsense. They're that first one. I don't know what happened after that. I'm talking about that very first one was all not legit.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always heard that always made a lot of sense to me was that, and I think this would almost have to be the case to a certain degree, was that there was some sort of footage that was filmed in the event that there was a disaster. Now, whether or not that got used or not, but I think that I think that's an interesting thing to pursue for sure.
Absolutely.
But I think this is also, an inflection point of so this is sort of indicative. This is a good little riff. Our faith and our trust in everything has just been absolutely shattered.
Yes.
And I was at a panel at a conference, and we were talking about just the whole disclosure thing. And I said, you're never getting disclosure. Do you know why? And I said, okay, think of the person that you didn't vote for in the last election. Now think that they won, and now think that they're telling you that aliens are real. Do you believe them? The answer is no. Nobody does.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone's opinion is so strong and calcified in every single direction that your past disclosure. There's never going to be any trust. The trust in all our institutions is so fundamentally broken.
And you have to wonder if that was done on purpose. In some regard, not overall government direction, but a group. I'm a big proponent of Hanlon's razor as opposed to Occam's razor.
Remind me of Hanlon's razor. That's the stupidity malice thing.
Yes, do not attribute to malice what could be attributed to stupidity. I think that's a majority of things going on, and that there's a group within that knows how to manipulate that stupidity into their own.
Or the other thing is that the other idea is that things were always this disorganized and this deceptive.
Yes.
We're just now finding out about them.
Which feeds into the whole Great Awakening narrative that's out there. Is that really happening? Or do we feel this way?
Yeah,
because we're getting, more aware, or is it just more blatant?
Well, I'm saying this not to call anyone out who didn't do this, but, and again, like, if you want to get smashed, believe me, like, a part of my heart is right there with you. But, I feel like a lot of people 2020'd wrong. And what I mean by that is, like, if there was ever a point to upend your life in a different direction, that was the moment to do it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I ended up doing, checking myself into rehab. That's why I say I don't think a lot of people capitalized on that. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back in that regard. I'm not trying to say that everybody has to get sober. I'm not saying that either. But I do think that, man, if there was going to be an opportunity for that, when everything is turned upside down, that was the moment to do it. So I'm kind of glad that it took hold during that year. Granted, it was at the tail end of it, but
it's a shame that so many people took the opposite approach and said, I'm going to become a hermit and play video games or whatever. The whole.
Well, and you know what? Like, I've noticed myself in my personal life, like social interactions post 2020 are much more draining than they were beforehand.
Very much so.
Even though I want to return to that sort of normalcy, I spend a small amount of time, half the amount of time that I normally would with a group of people. I'm like, okay, I am tapped out on people for a while.
It's I think it's just too much energy from all those people. At least that's my perception of it. That being around that many people is just such an energetic input that your body's not used to anymore.
Yeah,
because of the limited social interaction. I mean, that's been my perspective.
Well, and pile onto it the heightened tensions, and pile onto it the
the fear.
There are people who aren't speaking their mind, and there are people who are speaking too much of their mind, and it seems like it's either one of those two extremes nowadays.
And there's no gentle balance because there's such balkanization between groups of everything now. Everything's so split and so divided. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, even like, something as innocuous as something that I used to be into, which is, I mean, not post Disney, honestly, but the Star Wars fandom. Like, they used to be like, it used to be like, they used to gobble up everything that was put in front of them, and now it's like it's so like divisive. It's crazy.
Don't even get me started on Ahsoka.
Yeah, I was on board. I even, sort of granted a bit of faith that there was some direction for the sequel trilogy through The Last Jedi, but the Rise of Skywalker came out, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I've lived long enough to just see this turn into garbage. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is not my thing anymore, and I just sort of
dude, the Force is female now.
Well, it's just, I just can't believe that a giant franchise devolved into two directors like having a call and response of fixing each other's mistakes or what they perceived as mistakes. It's just like, you guys had no idea what was gonna happen.
They've destroyed the brand, and
it's astonishing to see.
It's killing Disney right now too.
I mean, yeah, I was super deep into the Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, me too.
And but part of that too, I think, is the same people who would have beaten me up for knowing the word Mandalorian are now tuning into the Mandalorian every week. It's become as mainstream as football. And there's an inner sort of hipster part of me that's kind of like, well, I liked it more when it was sort of my thing. I've noticed that with some of the UFO crew too. It's like, I was into UFOs. Like, I don't want to talk about UFOs with normal people, after years and years and years of wishing normal people would talk about UFOs. Now it's become this trendy thing, like, have you seen the Tic Tac video? And it's like, I just don't talk.
I totally know that feeling. It's like, people want to talk to me about something. I'm like, oh, not this again. Yeah. But yes, I get it. Speaking of not ruined shows, have you seen One Piece on Netflix?
I have not.
It's excellent.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
And everyone listening, highly recommended.
I've gotten my heart broken on series too often.
I agree. Yeah. They get canceled.
And Netflix is really bad about that. I'll never forget the fact that like the day after the Dark Crystal series won an Emmy. They're like, yeah, no season 2. And it's like, what are you talking about? I get tired of seeing these storylines get teased as having some sort of closure, and they just never do.
Did you ever see that Netflix show the October Faction?
I don't even know if it sounds familiar. Was that the werewolf?
Yes.
Were there werewolves involved? Okay, no, I didn't see it.
Werewolves and vampires and all kinds of shit. It was all kind of crazy stuff. That was really good, and they just canceled it. Alter Carbon was really good. They canceled that. The Magicians, they didn't really cancel, but I like that show.
Yeah, there's so many like that.
The Order, that was another good one.
I mean, honestly, I know some people who hated this, but I was really digging Raised by Wolves on HBO Max.
Yeah, really interesting.
It was like I said to my wife, it's like I don't necessarily understand what's going on in terms of like on the textual plot level, but like in terms of like the archetypal level, everything was just nesting together so nicely, and I was making a lot of, and then that got the axe too. But this is kind of something that I've noticed, like it's kind of why I don't read as much as I want to, because when you write so much, you just don't want to read as much. You just you get tired of looking at words. But even when I do pick up a novel or something, like I can't tell you how many times I've picked up something that looks really good and exciting, and I like turn over the back cover and it's like, book 1 of the Swordbringer Chronicles, and it's like, I don't want to commit to this. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to like this. And now you're telling me that I'm going to get a partial story, and it's, there's something to be said, I think, about getting in and out with a concise plot that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and not turning it into a franchise
with good character development.
With good character development. I think that's the true mark of a good brand or a good idea, is that like you can come up with an organic idea for a sequel, and you don't have to like leave it on the cliffhanger. And I realize that the cliffhanger has a long standing history in the era of the serials and stuff, and like but at the same time, like I want to see a story, and the story doesn't end halfway through.
Yeah, that going back to Alter Carbon, that's how those books were. They were really good. When I first read them, read the first one, it was concise. It was a story that was wrapped up in that one book, right? And the next book was another adventure, so you didn't have to wait. I totally agree with what you said.
Yeah, and even so, like a lot of these series that have sort of like legacy finales, like I think of like Deadwood or something. Man, they so rarely stick the landing,
Yeah.
It's really sort of disappointing. I have not caught the Justified revival, but I do remember Justified, the series, having a very satisfying ending in its own regard.
I've never seen that show.
Oh, it's great. It's great. That's when my love affair with Timothy Oliphant started. He's just perfect. Him and Walton Goggins.
I like him.
Perfect casting, and just this. Some seasons are better than others. There were some growing pains, but once you get into those middle seasons, like it's just fantastic. You have to that first season. You have to sort of excuse the fact that Kentucky looks like it was shot outside of San Bernardino or something, because it's like, oh, we're in the holler here, and it's like, this is not what Kentucky looks like. But no, but it's a fantastic series.
That's cool. I will check that out. Did you ever see that movie, American Ultra?
No, I heard about it.
Walton Goggins is in that. He plays a great psychopath.
Yeah, I have a rash that breaks out whenever I see Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, I don't like him either, and he's annoying in the movie. But but the movie's really good. I'll take that back. The movie's really interesting, and it's a funny story. So
okay. I mean, yeah, it's tied into it's an MK Ultra riff, right? It's like mind control.
Yeah. And he got programmed to be locked in his town. It's an interesting story, and the fact that John Landis' son directed it is kind of interesting too. Max Landis.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who like every time they show up in a film, I absolutely dig what they're doing, and Goggins is one of them. Oliphant's one of them. Keith David is one of them.
Yeah.
Just these like, I wish that some of these character actors.
Keith David or David Keith?
Keith,
black guy.
Yeah,
David Keith.
Isn't that? Because there's a Keith David. I thought it was Keith. Hold on. Fire up the Google machine.
Keith David. Maybe you're right. You are right. I'm wrong.
Yeah, Keith David. Yeah.
God, damn, 2 first name people.
But it's like sort of like the Bill Paxton, Bill Pullman thing, right?
Yes, exactly. Or there's another one too. Dermot Mulrooney and I forget the other guy.
But yeah, I mean, there's some people, I love that's the kind of film goer that I am. Like, I could care less about the top level of billing on a film. It's like, tell me who's like four deep into the credits. Sorry, you're good.
It's Dylan McDermott.
Dylan McDermott.
The Saturday Night Live did a like a game show. Who is this Dylan McDermott or I forget the guy's name? Dermot Mulrooney.
Dermot Mulrooney.
They look a lot alike, and they just go back and forth. It's funny.
Yeah.
I put it in the live chat for anyone who's listening. So let's talk about your new book.
All right. Yeah. Speaking of things that have a beginning, middle, and a dadgum end, Yeah.
There you go.
You know, it's kind of funny, Jerry. This is like my 8th book now, and amongst a lot of friends and family, you'd think this was my first in terms of like their interest. Oh, you wrote a real book, like a fun book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've run into that myself.
Yeah. But them old ways never died. It was so the reason that I hadn't written fiction before is because the sort of fiction that I wanted to write, I didn't know if I had the capacity to pull off. You know, I know that you know the sort of horror films that I like to see, and I'm not even sure this book constitutes horror, but this is a good example. The sort of horror films that I like to see, like the monster isn't the monster, you know. I know that sounds kind of trite, but like I think if somebody who's done a really good, consistent job of this is Jordan Peele, and what's his name, right? Jordan Peele. Why am I having a brain blank?
Key, the other guy.
No. Yeah, Jordan Peele. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Jordan Peele.
I had a complete. Yeah,
the Nope guy, right?
My brain got fried. Yeah. And you know, in each of those films, like the antagonizing force is the thing, but it's also a stand-in for something, you know, different, and that, you know, you can sort of switch out your proper nouns, and it'll be, you know, it'll still have some sort of meaning to the character, or meaning to what he's trying to say. And that was the sort of thing that I wanted to do that had some sort of like had some degree of symbolism behind it, and I just didn't know if I could pull it off. And you know, I'm still not sure if I did. But I landed on an idea that I thought worked, and it all came together really quickly. I think I outlined it from December to February, and I started writing in March, and I was done in May. And just, you know, banging out.
That's great.
Banging out as much as I could. I mean, you know, I wouldn't say downloaded, but it kind of had that sort of quality. And that's another reason I wanted to do it too, is because, you know, you've got I know enough authors that have told me things like, oh, my character comes and speaks to me and tells me that I can't do this, or I shouldn't be in this situation, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to experience that, because, you know, I go out looking for paranormal things, and they don't tend to happen to me.
Right.
So I'm like, fine, then I'll do this, and sort of treat it like its own little paranormal experience. And it kind of ended up being that. I had a couple of those moments where things would come to me, and I'm like, I have no idea where this is coming from. Would often happen as I went to fall asleep, which was really obnoxious, because I had to write it down, because if I didn't write it down, it would just evaporate.
Yep.
But yeah, I would have these moments that would just solve problems, or it would be something very much in character that would it just really did feel like it wasn't coming from me. So while I didn't have, like, you know, a John Constantine moment where, like, you know, any of the characters stepped out and greeted me, maybe I didn't have that. I had something that was a little bit odd, but well, I didn't necessarily have anything that dramatic happen. I definitely had that sense that it was I was a vector for some of this stuff. And the interesting thing is, there weren't a ton of rewrites. Obviously this is like the 6th draft or whatever, but in terms of like substantial, like, oh, I need to go back and rewrite this chapter, there was only one really big change in that regard. And I remember when I was writing it, and when I finished it, it wasn't the sense that, oh, I rewrote this and it's better now. It was the sense of like, oh, the transmission was garbled the first time. It was like, oh, I had a malfunctioning transmitter. That was what happened.
You lost your connection to the cloud.
Yeah, it kind of felt that way.
Yeah. That's that. I always think of that as being in the zone. You're in the zone. You're connected, and you can draw upon the vast knowledge of the universe, because everything exists there. And
well, that was the thing too. Is, you know, I was always a big fan of this Carl Jung thing of, like, you know, ideas have people don't have ideas. And like, okay, well, what does that mean, Josh? Like, you say that, put your money where your mouth is.
It's absolutely
so I did.
true.
I did have a lot of that. I totally. After going through this, I always suspected it was true, but after going through this project, I do feel that it is true. Yeah.
I think that happened to Grant Morrison too, right? With his experience of writing The Invisibles. If you've ever heard that lecture.
Grant Morrison had something like that. Neil Gaiman had something like that.
Yeah, Gaiman.
Yeah.
Who's an amazing writer, by the way. His stuff is just fantastic. I love him.
Yeah, I do too. And
I wish I could write that well.
if American Gods wasn't so long, I'd go back and reread it, but it's so long.
I have an audiobook if you'd like to listen to it.
Oh, nice. I'm going to take you up on that. But yeah, and even people like Ray Bradbury. I read an interview with Ray Bradbury.
I have a funny Ray Bradbury story. Go ahead.
Okay. We'll circle back to it. With Ray Bradbury, it was he in this interview he was talking about how he would come down to his office in the small hours, and he would just pick one of his books off the shelf and read it and be like, I have no idea where this came from. He would just start weeping. And I'm like, I kind of get that. Like, I'm not saying that what I wrote is on that quality level by any stretch of the imagination, but I kind of get that sort of feeling that it just comes from some other place, which is kind of, it's why we talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We sort of alluded to it. It's a different beast than the other stuff I write. My nonfiction, I feel like I'm just collating stuff and pointing out things that honestly people probably should have pointed out 40 or 50 years ago, but with this, it's like you're staring at that blank cursor, and it's it's at once it's liberating and reassuring, because you've got to wait for it to come to you, but sometimes like it's awfully daunting to be like, where is this going to come from? But it does eventually, I think.
Yeah, it's tough. I remember banging out books back 20 years ago when I was writing, and just like not having no idea what I'm going to do, and then it just comes. And my stuff was all nonfiction, technical stuff. So I mean, it's nowhere near like writing a novel, as I'm now learning. I need to go to the bathroom, and I don't have a co-host to talk while I'm doing that. So we're gonna take a break, people. You're muted.
Maybe I'll capitalize on that as well, right quick.
Yeah, we're gonna take a bathroom break. We'll be back in like five minutes. Right. Less 5. Bye. All right, I'm back. I was holding it in really well, and then it started to rain really loud outside, and it just kind of went crazy. Hey, if you guys have any questions for Josh, put them in chat, and I will ask him when we're done talking about his book. We'll get the show wrapped up.
The pause that refreshes.
Oh my god. I was just talking about, I was holding it in like I was going to make it almost, and then it started to pour outside, and all I could hear is rain falling and water. I'm like, oh, I gotta go.
Yeah, that'll do it.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, that's cool. So, your book, I just started reading it. I apologize. I'm bad that way. just from the synopsis alone, I felt that there was started from a semi-autobiographical place.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of me in there.
Yeah.
Barbara Fisher, who edited Ecology of Souls, has the 6 Degrees of John Keel podcast. She also edited this, and we were talking about it. She's like, Rick is like you through a glass darkly. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like my worst traits dialed up to 11. But it is that thing, like, as tried as it is, that write what you know about thing.
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
is true. So so of course it's a book about Faeries being a musician living in North Georgia and recovery, I guess. It's got addiction. But it's sort of a chance to dabble in some of those areas to a degree that I normally wouldn't, and to get really cynical with my own inner dialogue and put that onto Rick. But at the same time, like, it's these people do take their own sort of life, of their own, as we were alluding to, and there are some things that are some of it's me, and some of it's other people I know, and some of it's just from heaven knows where. And that's the other thing, man. When you're writing a fiction book and you share it with friends and family, they're like, "Oh, so and so is so and so, and so is so and so." You're like, no, like that might be a jumping off point, but you can't you can't do that 1-to-1 comparison all the time. Especially if you're sort of to the degree that the character will let you molding their actions and thoughts to fit the story. But yeah, there's plenty of that in there for me. And part of it, a big part of the book is set in 2020. It is set in the pandemic, and I was lucky in the regard that I as a musician, I also had this other writing thing that I do, and that gave me an outlet to focus on something else. And I just had so many musician friends who just, that's all they did was music. They would teach and they would play and they would make most of their money playing, and they were just like stranded. So I want to sort of memorialize that moment for a lot of them. Like I said, I got out of it. I fared, even though it ended in a rehab center, I still fared better than a lot of my friends did, because they didn't have that outlet, and sort of be in that position of stasis and limbo. I thought was something like that I really wanted to immortalize and memorialize. And so that's a lot of Rick's thing too, is that he's just like, he lives to perform, and he doesn't have that outlet anymore in that time frame. And that's sort of, I think, that sort of isolation provides fertile ground for a self-destructive spiral, and for the spookiness to come out. And it starts spookier and gets less spooky as you go along. I kind of really don't know even sometimes how to categorize the book, because it starts out as American folk horror and then becomes like dark fantasy or something, I think, towards the end. But
why do we don't need to characterize it? It's a book.
Yeah, no, genres are kind of passe, right?
Sort of
the one thing or the other. Yeah. And it's been really kind of hard to talk about it, because like with my nonfiction stuff, it's like, here are the ideas that I put forth in there, take a look at the book to see how I got there. Whereas with this, it's like, well, do you just give away the whole plot? Like, how do you talk about it?
Yeah, I understand that. But it is a journey that the character goes through.
It is. And a big part of the fun, I think, at least, is seeing the character come to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit on the long side, but I really wanted to apply a lot of. So I grew up in sort of a weird household, in the sense that, like, my dad subscribed to the trades, like we had like weekly variety delivered to our household.
Jeez.
So I was like really into like the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, even though I've never really done any filmmaking like that in my life. But like, when I watch a movie, I'm not watching for the plot or the characters necessarily. All that plays a role, but like I'm also looking at like how it's shot and like the pacing and things like that, which I have a really keen interest in. So I made it a point that if it's going to be long, it's still got to have that sense of like hitting the right beats at the right portion of the story. So I checked, and within like 2 or 3 pages, it's like, you know, there's a clear first act. It's, if you take a 4-act structure, not a 3-act structure, there's a clear first act ending a quarter of the way through, second act ending halfway through. So it does sort of follow that structure. But you know, also those other lessons that you learn from being into storytelling and stuff like that, like you know, show don't tell, things like that, you know, having characters answer things obliquely and things like that. I really wanted to play with those. It was a lot of fun in that regard. So that was something that I sort of have done to try to make the length of it a little bit more palatable. And the other thing is that I think with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 chapters, and there are about 50, something strange happens in each chapter. So there's always, you know, there's not these big stretches that are just mundane, boring. Like something strange is almost guaranteed to happen in every chapter. So
that's great.
That was part of it too.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the odd things that happened to you? You said some things, I forgot how you stated it, but you had some semi-paranormal activity or super. Well, I don't know. I forgot what you actually worded
I
it.
think I know what you're getting at. So there was a there was the thing that I was talking about where, like, you know, sort of I had the characters saying things to me and plot points resolving themselves on the verge of sleep, and also the idea that, you know, I was getting the transmission wrong when I had written it improperly the first time through. But also there was a moment where there's a character named Bora, who you know, I describe her in the book, and she's a pharmacist. And I did pull up to my pharmacy to get a prescription through the drive-through one day, and there was a lady working behind the counter of the pharmacy who handed my prescriptions to me, who, I'll be damned if it didn't resemble Bora. She didn't resemble Bora. I say it like it was a tulpa or something, but like, you know, it looked a lot like Bora. I was envisioned, and oddly enough, so I haven't seen this lady at that pharmacy since then, and I don't know if it's not something that, you know, you just necessarily ask for pharmacists, but you know, I haven't seen her since then, so I'm kind of waiting for her to show back up. But it's been a couple months now. And this lady who handed me my prescriptions that day, again, looked like Bora, was working at the pharmacy, and was wearing like an old Soviet Ushanka hat,
really?
which is like really sort of out of place, because this is like, man, this is probably March or something, so it wasn't super cold down here by any stretch of the imagination. And so like that hat winds up on Bora in my book at one point as sort of a nod to that moment.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so that was like the closest thing that I got to a character stepping out, and I'm not sure if it was or it wasn't. I kind of don't want to know if she's a real person who works there, because I want to have it in my head canon, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it was something strange. Yeah,
I think those kind of experiences, if you tend not to brush them off, will just reinforce the next ones even more. So
yeah, and that's the thing that really sort of has boggled my mind about this experience, is like having sort of interactions with, let's call it the imaginal. I'm really astounded at some of these skeptical authors that I know who write fiction who don't think that that's a paranormal thing, to like have that interaction with the imaginal realm, you know, and have that sort of, I mean, even George R.R. Martin talks about this, like trying to put Tyrion into a scene, and Tyrion being like, no, you can't do that. Like, and he would try to do it, and it wouldn't work on the page. And I'm like, that's, how can you not see that as something like, at least, you know, coming right up to being paranormal, if not full-blown paranormal? I don't know how you do that.
You know, but what is paranormal? It's just reality we don't understand.
Right.
I think this goes back to that whole Great Awakening thing we were talking about earlier. I don't remember if that was on or off, but the show. But what if this aspect of reality is now becoming more apparent to us? That those kind of things used to be commonplace, and we've just lost that connection or ability or what have you, or it's blotted out by being, jammed with Wi-Fi all day. Who knows?
I think that there's something like that happening. I mean, I hear it from too many disparate sources. So there's number one, like the intuition that you and I both have, that something squirrely is going on. That's sort of like metaphysical, right? But also, you've got this resurgence in paganism and astrology. I mean, I thought that the magical renaissance was sort of overblown until I ran into a magic shop. Not like, tricks, but like, magical practitioner, a magic shop in like 15 miles outside of Jacksonville, North Carolina, which is like, military town. And it's like there's trailer parks and pine woods and like homes. And then there's this on a Wednesday in the middle of late summer, on a Wednesday afternoon, the parking lot of this magic shop is just packed. And I'm like, I have to pull in and go inside. And it's there's a ton of people there buying this stuff. So like, there's that sense, like even in some place, I mean, if this was, I don't know, downtown New Orleans or Salem or even like anywhere near to a larger metropolitan area, like it would make sense. But like Jacksonville, like kidding me? So like there's that, and then there's also there's some fairy groups that I'm a part of, that there's this consensus in the fairy communities, the people who believe that they work with these spirits, that the veil is thinning and that there are more intrusions from the other world. I've been hearing that as well. And then like that is one of those things that sort of gives me pause with the whole disclosure thing, right? Maybe this will be a more fruitful disclosure season than we've seen in the past.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it does give me that sense. And I don't know if I'm sure that there's a psychosocial angle that you could put forth, that just we all feel this instability in the world and we're kind of like, what's gonna happen? And so we're sort of retreating back to our superstitions. But I think that there's something else at play. And I think it's sort of what happens. I think it's sort of what happens on these inflections of one world power ceding to another and things like that. I think that's just sort of what happens in this sort of liminal period.
One of the background conversations around this whole idea is that what was I going to say now? I forgot. I'll think of it. I should have written it down.
Well, there's something to it, and I think I think
there is absolutely.
I think it's really fascinating to see. Okay, I won't
we'll
filibuster here, and I won't filibuster, and I'll let you.
So one of the background topics of conversation around this whole thinning veil thing is that it goes back far, but like there's this idea that what we call the astral plane, some will refer to as the lower fourth dimension. There's a lot of names for it. Whatever it is a construct that is somehow controlled, and that this veil thinning that we're experiencing is actually that dimension, if you will, merging with our current dimension. And that's the thinness is where they're the merge point. And at those points is where these liminal spaces, if you will, are where this nonsense. I'm not saying I pull up to this. I'm just saying this is one of the ideas out there.
There have been some really prominent Mandela effects that make me believe that something like that might be going on.
Oh yeah, I've had one myself.
Well, the ones that stick with me. Well, there are a couple that stick with me. The Shazam thing, the Shazam one stuck with me.
Yep.
The one that I am I there's one that I really can't get my head around, which is the one from Moonraker.
The teeth with the braces.
With the braces, yeah, because that's the joke. Like that's the joke. And I even messaged someone on a James Bond podcast and who had mentioned that. I'm like, no, it's not. It's not a thing. And they're like, yeah, it is. Like I run a James Bond podcast. Of course I know that joke in Moonraker. And then I went back and like, oh my god. And then the other one is this K in Chick-fil-A. Like I don't ever remember. I remember it being CHIC-FIL-A.
I kind of remember that. And then
I remember thinking it was a stupid way to spell Chick-fil-A.
Me too.
I
think the ones around corporate branding and logos probably aren't very significant.
Well, you know, I read a newspaper article where they reached back to, well, so yeah, caveat. I read a newspaper article where they reached back to like the marketing department at Chick-fil-A, and they said that it was always CHICK. But I did also see, I guess it was an Instagram reel of a bunch of like local press, especially in the South, that was spelling it CHIC-FIL-A. But I still remember signage without the K. But anyway, neither here nor there.
I never learned of Chick-fil-A till 2001 or 2, like when I moved to Georgia. So
I'm indifferent on Chick-fil-A. I want to go to Bojangles instead.
I like Bojangles. Their pimento cheese chicken filet biscuits really good.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also mention to you that George Hansen was a guest on THC recently, if you haven't heard that.
Oh wow, okay. He hasn't been doing many doing many interviews lately.
I know. Yeah. I know. But they talk about his book, the Trickster book, and all that. So I mean I know you like Greg's work. And,
well, you know that book, the Trickster and the Paranormal, is just one of those that has endured, and it has, it has remained evergreen.
Yeah,
and it's one of those books, like I keep waiting for something to sort of dispel an aspect of it, and it just doesn't happen. I see so many things in the broader phenomenon as a whole that seem to confirm a lot of the things that he said in that book, and I'm like, yep, it's one of those books that, it might even be more consistent in that regard than Demonic Reality, which is a book that I also adore.
Also, excellent book.
But like Hansen's thing just seems like he nailed it. He nailed a lot of the aspects behind this stuff.
He did. What else did I have on my list here? I'll tell you my Bradbury story.
Okay.
I don't remember where I read this, but I swear to God I read this in a book. And in this book, and I cannot find a reference to it anymore, and I can't find anything online about it. It was like in the 70s when I was a teenager. I was in grade school. I probably read this, or maybe freshman high school. It was a book about Brooklyn, New York, or Queens, I forget. And Penn and Teller were just getting started in it. It was like, it wasn't about them per se, but they were in it as characters. And one or both of them were at a party with Ray Bradbury. And he was really fucked up. And apparently he came up to one of these characters with a box of Milk Duds. Or the character had Milk Duds. I don't remember who had the Milk Duds. But Ray Bradbury came up to this person and said, when I was a kid, we used to call these cunts.
Okay. That's the story.
That's the story. That anecdote is burned in my mind, and I cannot find a reference for it anywhere.
Wow. Yeah, that's a new one to me. Huh.
I have no idea. I know there was a book called Penn and Teller Get Killed. It could have been in that book.
I don't imagine you would find a reference to that anywhere.
I can't even find any books where Penn and Teller are the main character,
Wow.
It's just a bizarre story, and I swear to God I read it somewhere. I mean, it was in a book. 'Cause I read almost everything when I was a kid. It was crazy. It's cool. So, we got 10 minutes left. What's on the horizon for you? You got 3 projects mentioned?
Yeah, I got 3 projects, and they're all they're all co-authored projects. So I am happy about them being co-authored projects because
It's not all on
I
you.
well, yeah, and it's not like I'm displacing them and telling them to do more work, although in one instance they've done so much more work than I have, and I feel really sheepish about it, and I need to pick up my slack. But it's nice to have someone else to bounce ideas off of, and it's nice to know that there'll be another set of eyes on it too. I mean, that's the worst thing
Yeah.
about writing
Writing in a vacuum.
well, it's not even that. So like the worst thing about writing long books, and I don't really want to write long books. It's just I'm just writing what I write. But like in the amount of time that it takes me to proofread 260,000 words of Ecology of Souls, like if I'd written something that's 80,000 words, I could have done it multiple times. So you're constantly, if you're obsessive compulsive like I am diagnosed, you sort of end up just anticipating more typos and more errors and more things going wrong. So it's going to be nice to just sort of share that process with someone. But they're three pretty different projects, and I am going to sort of remain coy about them since they are co-authored because I don't really know how much we've announced one way or the other.
It's fine. I'm not looking for scoops. I just want to know what's going on.
But yeah, so I'm returning, and I'm sort of doing the research for all three at once, so
Good.
that that just felt like the smart thing to do as opposed to going back through all my books again and looking at it three separate times. So I feel a little bit scattered in that regard, but I'm really excited about all three of them. They're all very different, and I think they'll bring something new to the table. And it's kind of I'm still not sure how well received Them Old Ways Never Died is. It seems to be selling pretty well, but I don't necessarily think people are clamoring for more Joshua Cutchin fiction. So we'll see if I ever return to that. I kind of have one or two more ideas that I think would be interesting and fun, but I really did enjoy I just enjoyed the process. It was just a nice breath of fresh air, and really the only thing that I felt like I could do after Ecology of Souls, since it was so long and in depth.
That's excellent. You could always go the Richard Bachman route.
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess. But
I wouldn't. I mean,
no. I mean, yeah. I here's the other thing. Like even what I've sold of Them Old Ways Never Died, I would have sold like a tenth of that if it wasn't like for me, and I have an audience and a fan base and people who are interested in reading this stuff. So yeah, it was just a grand experiment, and I don't have what's the phrase that I keep on using? I don't have any expectations for the book, but I have aspirations for it.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
I'm interested. There are a couple of people that I'm really interested to get their feedback on, and I'm going to sort of gauge what they say from that. But
I can't wait to finish it.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I have some upcoming events. One of which has not been announced yet, so I will abstain on announcing that one yet. But it's should be happening early December. But the other one that is coming up right around the corner is Strange Realities 2023.
Yep, Nashville.
In Nashville. Yep, in Nashville, Tennessee, with Adam Sane.
SIR.
Yep. StrangeRealitiesConference.com. That's November 3rd through 5th. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's always a really good time. A lot of good time baked in to spend time together, and would love to see any of the listeners there.
I had a great time the year I went on 2019. It was
that was 2019. Yeah, gosh, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this, coming back to it again this year. I'm like, this is the 5th year. Like we did a remote year for 2020, and I'm like, man, it does not feel like 5 years. But then I think about all that's changed since then, and yeah, I guess it was 5 years. Yeah,
I was going to speak at the 2021.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
And after they went virtual, I dipped. I'm like, no, I don't want to do virtual. I wanted to actually speak in person.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there's sort of a big push for doing virtual conferences, and if you can't make it, I totally get that, and I'm not bagging on anybody who has done a virtual conference, because I think it's a really good way and a much more cost-effective way to get a bunch of different speakers in, and it's a great idea for that. In that regard, but there is something about like being in the same room with people and the energy and like getting to chat with them afterwards and getting the hang. The hang. It's all about the hang.
Absolutely.
That I think you just can't replicate digitally. So it has to be done in meat space.
I agree. So I had a couple questions from the live chat, if you don't mind, and then I will let you go. Do you differentiate between fairies and the fae?
No. And honestly, like, I could probably be a little bit more discriminating with my fairy taxonomy. I mean, but it gets so region specific in terms of the different names that people sort of call these things. What I tend to do is I tend to sort of default back onto some of these categories that some folklorists have talked about. So you've got, Catherine Briggs divided fairies into solitary fairies like leprechauns and trooping fairies like these fairies that would march across the landscape. But you can also throw into that like household spirits, which are sometimes fairies, and there's an entire conversation to be had on exactly how you spell fairy. But for me, I just sort of lump them all together, and I honestly I kind of lump in trolls, ogres, giants, mermaids, etc., because you'll see a lot of different things in those lore that is, straight out of fairy lore. It's better to think of that all as a Venn diagram than it is these sort of discrete,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool. What else we got here? What was the coolest place or venue that you have ever played music?
Well, I joked one time, and this isn't as prestigious as it sounds, but I joked one time that I'm probably one of the only tuba players to have both played in Carnegie Hall and in Green Hall, Texas. So I did. The Carnegie Hall thing isn't as prestigious as it sounds. I played there, and it was still a great opportunity. I'm still grateful for it. But my high school wind ensemble played there back when I was a student. But I also played in one of the most famous beer halls in Texas, in Green Hall, and
That's awesome.
I grew up listening to I grew up with my parents playing that wonderful Jerry Jeff Walker album from Green Hall. So I got a chance to play there as well. So that's sort of my go-to response for that.
Excellent. All right. Can I read this? In which corners of the U.S. do you think the fairies are most concentrated?
Well, it depends on how you want to approach that question. Like if you're looking for something that is of that Western European flavor, you're best going to the Northeast. Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, especially, but also Massachusetts, that area. That's the one part of the world. Well, there's another conversation to be had on this too, but like the fairy belief from Western Europe was imported best from there. Now, having said that, some of that scholarship I think is going to be challenged in a really big way with Morgan Daimler's work. Morgan is writing a new book on fairy belief in North America, and I've even noticed it a bit myself, where you'll find Cornish Tommyknocker lore preserved all the way as far west as like Montana. But all that, even saying that sort of is a bit disingenuous, because you've got all this indigenous belief, and there's so much of I think I read a survey. I've mentioned Ecology of Souls, and I'm getting the statistic wrong, but it's something like this overwhelming majority of like 80% of the tribes here in North America believed in some form of little people. I will say that I'm quite struck by the resemblance of Cherokee belief to a lot of that Western European belief. In the Southeast, the ancestral home of the Cherokee, you see a lot of the things that are just like plucked right out of the Western European folklore, down to missing time and an association with earthworks. By no means exclusive to the Cherokee, because you'll find associations between little people and ruins and earthworks, etc., elsewhere. But it's just such a startling match for that Western European stuff that it really raises in my mind only one of two possibilities. It's either it's either supernatural in some sense, people are objectively seeing similar things in both areas, or it's an egregore or something. It's somehow supernatural, or there's a degree of cultural contamination from these early ethnographers who who just sort of like inserted that from their knowledge of Western European fairy folklore.
Right.
It's got to be one of those two things because it's so specific. So I would say the southeastern US is up there, even though I haven't had, unfortunately, too many experiences in that regard myself.
Too many yet. That you made me think of the Hopi Indians with the ant people.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the ant people was a reference to size. I'm not sure.
No, but they were underground dwellers.
Right, but yeah, it's the same. It's that same trope of things. Yep. Underground. Yep.
That's
perhaps an older race, which which you'll see in some of the more problematic European literature, but you'll also see referenced, in a lot of the indigenous myths and legends too, about there being, perhaps the Fae folk were here before us, and they do serve in some sort of ancestral capacity. You'll find some references to that.
Yeah. No, it all makes sense to it. I was telling a friend of mine that a lot of this stuff we'll probably never have answers to.
No.
And when we die, we'll either find out, we'll understand, or we won't care.
well, how's this for a parting shot? If you're looking for answers to this stuff, I think you're doing it wrong. Like, I don't think that's what we're being called to do when we're being asked to look at this stuff. Like, studying any of these things is its own form of personal alchemy. There's a quote that the French ufologist Ami Michel said, and I'm not sure of the exact wording, but it's something to the extent of studying UFOs is the only topic where you start out looking at things in the sky and you end up reading texts by Arab mystics. It's like, yeah, that's totally what it is. And that might be to a degree the purpose of these things. I'm constantly amazed how my world is re-enchanted by thinking about these things. I was just saying this the other night to someone, like, I'll be at a museum and I'll be in one of the most boring sections, like the geology section or something, and I'll see something and it'll have this sort of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or should I say 6 degrees of ufology, and it'll just make it more interesting to me. And and maybe that's a cheat and maybe that's a hack, but I think that that might be what we're being called to do when we look at these things.
Yeah, that's great parting shot. Well, thank you so much for putting up with my nonsense. And
it's great catching up.
It is good catching up. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you?
JoshuaCutchin.com, JoshuaCutchin.com, and there's links to all that stuff, everything about me there. I have copies of Ecology of Souls and copies of Them Old Ways Never Died that you can get directly from me signed.
Oh, cool. I will definitely buy them. I'm going to get that Ecology of Souls. After I finish this, I'll buy that.
All right, yeah, just drop me a line.
I will. Great. Well, great. And people, if you're anywhere near Nashville, October, or when is it?
It's later this year. It's November 3rd through 5th.
Okay, November 3rd through 5th. If you're anywhere near Nashville, definitely go check out Strange Realities. It's a fantastic conference. It's structured but informal. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
And it's just a good time. It's a good time to get together with people, like-minded people who aren't,
Yeah, to give you an idea of the conference, it's the only conference that I know where the lectures are BYOB. Like, you can bring your own bottle of whatever and just sit there and have a drink while you're listening to lectures.
And you could sit in the back or in the front, or you could stand. It doesn't matter. Okay.
Yep.
They did. Adam and Sorfield did a great job putting that together, and I commend them. So, anyway, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show. I love talking to you. Anytime you want to come back and talk, you're welcome.
Thanks. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back. I think. So we recorded a podcast with Dr. Andrew Kaufman. I'm not familiar with him. He's a terrain theorist. That I think is going to be aired next Wednesday night, so it's a pre-record. And then I think we'll be back at the end of the month with Melissa Martell, if I can get her book. So looking forward to that. Anyway, thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Nish, if you're listening. Hope your day goes better. And I will talk to you later. Take care.